right, New Room family, last story from the field. We're going to Cape Town, South Africa this morning. We're going to meet a great new friend named PetePortal. And Pete leads a ministry called Tree of Life. It really is extraordinary. There's a lot for us to kind of unpack with Pete. But when he was in his early 20s, he went on a mission trip to South Africa and was so moved by it that he's given his life to stay there. And he's now nearly 40. And he has been called into an area near Cape Town called Manenberg, where he has opened his home to men coming out of gangs and addiction. Now has opened a home for women as well. And Pete, I think, can think and talk about the bridge from awakening to transformation of society and mission, as well as anyone I've ever met. And so I'm just eager for y'all to get to know him and to hear his story, and maybe it'll sort of stir and loosen up some thinking and some ideas in your context. So let's go to Cape Town. Let's bring in Pete. Pete, are you there? There he is. All right. Welcome, Pete.
Hi, David. Good to be with you. Can you hear me all right?
So, Pete, if I've got my story straight, you grew up at the Westminster Abbey Choir School, and now you are providing homes for gangsters in Cape Town. Get us from one place to the other. How did you get from a very, sort of unusually elite kind of experience growing up in London to where you are today? Can you just give us the arc of that narrative?
Oh, the arc. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I didn't grow up at Westminster Abbey Choir School. I moved there when I was 8. But, as you can imagine, being sent to boarding school age 8, it's been a long journey of dealing with some of the heart pain. I was a chorister at Westminster Abbey, I suppose. That's all there is to say. But grew up with a middle-class, liberal Anglican understanding of God, which was honestly utterly dull, very serious, and overrated as far as I could work out. That meant that I was able to become a music scholar at my secondary school, and it was there, age 15, that I found Jesus after a fight in a takeaway shop one evening.
So, Pete, tell us more about how did you first get to South Africa? What happened there? What happened in your experience there?
Well, I was studying religious studies at university. I was at Edinburgh University, and it was at the end of my 3rd year. A friend came up to me and he said, hey, do you want to come to South Africa? I'm leading a short-term mission trip to South Africa. And I don't know about you, but I thought at that point I was going through a cool phase and I didn't want to be associated with the Christian Union. So I just said to him, you know what, no, I'm fine. I was trying to get my foot in the door at the BBC. I had a dream of being a kids' TV presenter, in fact, but realized that there are enough people in the office to have that one sorted. So I just thought, what the thing is, then he goes, okay, you don't want to come? I said, no. He goes, and he played the Christian trump card. I'm sure you have fallen victim to this before. He said, well, will you at least pray about it? And so I thought, oh, for goodness sake, I can't not pray about it. Sure, okay, I'll pray about it. So I went away, mumbled some half-baked prayer in my student digs. Nothing really happened, except that I got a letter through from the NHS, the National Health Service. You know, that world-leading free healthcare that we Brits love to moan and groan about? Well, yeah, they got in touch, and I'd been waiting for 9 months for a shoulder operation date. And so it's a brilliant service, but it's not very flexible on dates. And so I went back to him and I said, look, I prayed and God answered my prayers. The date of my proposed shoulder operation smack bang in the middle of this 6-week mission trip you're trying to get me on. And he said, no, why don't you give them a call? Just see if they can change it. And I thought, oh, for goodness sake, okay, fine. So I phoned the shoulder consultant secretary and she picked up. And I immediately clocked an accent that I didn't recognize. And she said, well, why do you want to change the date? It's very difficult. I said, well, a friend wants me to go on a short-term trip. She said, what kind of trip? I said, Christian mission trip. She goes, oh, I'm a Christian. Where's he wanting you to go? And I said, South Africa. She said, oh, I'm from South Africa. Whereabouts in South Africa are you going? I said, Paarl, a town just outside Cape Town. She goes, I'm from Pearl. And then she goes, look, this might not be very professional, but I think God wants you to go on this trip. And so it was one of those moments, you know, where your spirit leaps and your heart sinks. And you realize, oh, he's gone before me. So long story short, or medium short, we then get to Cape Town and we achieve very little of any lasting worth, honestly. We're commuting from a township to a prison to share the gospel with hardened prison gangsters through the medium of volleyball, which we couldn't play and they had no interest in.
Yeah.
You know, we were the cliche. Think of whatever caricature of a short-term mission trip coming from the West to Africa. We were absolutely that, I'm ashamed and embarrassed to say. But at the end of every day, we would get back to this 3-bedroom house that we were staying in. And again, on short-term mission trips, there are always a couple of intense types, you know, and there were 2 particularly intense types on this trip. And they said, why don't we have all the guys in one room, all the girls in another room, and the 3rd bedroom we can run as a 24/7 prayer room, which to me seemed like a questionable use of the 3rd bedroom. But okay, we're on mission, that's what you do. And at the end of every day, we would come back from listening to stories of intense, grinding poverty, systemic injustice, trauma, neglect, violence, you name it. We were utterly unequipped to deal with any of it. And we would sit in the prayer room and we would weep and we would pour out our heart to God. And I didn't actually have a grid for it then either, but I'm beginning to learn a bit more through you guys. This is your effect on me, about travailing prayer. And I think probably that's what we were doing without realizing it back then. Anyway, God deposited his heart in me for the next generation of young, drug-addicted gangsters. And I just thought, I don't know what constitutes a calling. I have no particular idea what I'm doing. But what if I was to see if the gospel could work in a place where I'm told not to go, amongst the people I'm told belong in jail?
Pete, beautiful. Pete, so tell us where you are today. What's unfolded? What is Tree of Life? What do you do? Just give us a snapshot of your ministry.
Yeah, well, I'm still here is the short answer. Yeah. We've been doing for 15 years, and Tree of Life is a 24/7 prayer community, really just a church. We did everything we could, I promise, not to become a church, but we were worshiping with young men coming out of addiction, you know, and one particular man I would sleep next to in our 24/7 prayer room, and as he woke up from heroin withdrawal pain, we would speak in tongues together. He received the gift of tongues, and the pains would go, and he would go back to sleep. And we did that for about 7 nights in a row, at the end of which he was fully off the detoxing pains of heroin through filling up the Holy Spirit. Wow. So those early days were, you know, were glorious and gnarly, a lot of break-ins and a lot of trauma. But we're still here, and the incremental, I guess, faithful plod that God has added to our number, I wouldn't say daily, but enough to keep us going periodically, those being saved. And so now, as you mentioned, we've got a home for young men coming out of gangs, drugs, and violent crime. And we have a home for vulnerable and abused women and their children. And so I often say we do church much better Monday to Saturday than on Sunday.
Wow.
On Sunday, we'll have a gathering, and there'll be a smattering of people. There'll be some in gangs and a couple detoxing off drugs. There'll be some in early recovery. There'll be a couple of Muslims. And if you look carefully, a couple of Christians in the corner somewhere, probably not dissimilar to the New Room vibe. Yeah, we just do church life on life, sharing our homes, sharing our resources, sharing our everything with a conviction, as you guys, I know, have, that the kingdom moves at the speed of relationship, but that there needs to be a lot of undoing in power and race and how they relate, the structures and the systems of injustice that manifest in us and through us. Because in 1994, Mandela dismantled the law of apartheid, but the spirit of apartheid continues to live on. So we're trying to offer solutions to Cape Town's issues. You know, it's
Wow.
the top 10 for homicides in the world. It's one of the most segregated cities in the most unequal country on earth. We're not trying to say, look, we've got some great strategies for government betterment and social policy. We're just trying to be a sign, a prophetic sign
Yes.
to a divided city of what Jesus can do
Yes.
when he is at the center.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's so good. Gosh. Pete, I got two final questions. The first is this book you've written called How to Be Unsuccessful. And it's such a provocative title. And you know, we've talked about it. I kind of feel like it's an anthem of emerging adults who are just kind of done with what they have inherited around the measures and metrics and trophies and career ladders of this life. Just say, no, there's so much more than I want in life than just those culturally adopted measures. Could you just sort of nail the real kernel of this book for us? Just what's the heart of that book? What and the traction that you feel like it's finding among readers?
The heart of the book, honestly, was therapy for me. I have this initially, and then it spiraled. But I have a very commonly recurring intrusive thought of just what have I got to show for my life? You know, I look around, I scroll through different people's news feeds and Instagram, and I comparing myself. Oh, if only I could be like them. Oh, they're much better than me. Oh, if only my church was that size. Oh, well, at least I'm not like that. Okay, you know, and one way or the other, you know, elicits a kind of pride or a despondency. So we know comparison's bad.
Wow.
But I think my core conviction is that the world, and even by extension, the church, is growing sick, pursuing the wrong sort of success. And what I mean by that is kind of oriented around noise, numbers, and narcissism. And so the book is really a clarion call to a generation who are just over it and exhausted. And it's saying, what does success look like for Jesus? Well, it's not what I accomplish as much as who I become. It's not the numbers of zeros behind my bank account, followers, or endeavors. It's my faithfulness to the call of God on me. I'm not doing this because it's effective. I'm doing it because it's true. And so really, it's a complete reorientation of our desires, both external and internal. And that's the point of the book, really.
Yeah. And so, Pete, the last chapter of that book, and I'd love for you just to comment on this. This is the last question. You know, we're in a gathering here. We're sowers for a great awakening. We're gathered under the banner of greater love. We believe that God is filling us with his love to be love in the world. In that last chapter, you do such a great job of bridging between revival and active engagement. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to us, just exhort us, encourage us around our experience of Jesus and our hands-on engagement with the world he died to save. Could you just comment on that bridge?
For sure. So in Philippians 3, verse 10, Paul gives us two keys for what he defines his keys for knowing Christ. He says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. Yeah. Now, we all want to know Christ. You guys want to know Christ. That's why you're in that room. We try our best when we're out of these emotional big conferences to be faithful to him. But Paul gives us these two keys. The first is resurrection power. And so this is what I call revivalism. It's those of us who go after the mindset and the perspective and the reality of heaven. And so the revivalists will typically go after a healing of bodies, a next world-focused evangelism, and demonic deliverance. These are signs of revival, we're told. Absolutely. But on the flip side, not only are we to pursue resurrection power, but also participatory suffering. And so we combine the glory of heaven with the grip of the world. And so on the other side to revivalists are activists who would say, well, listen, we're all for the healing of bodies, but we want the healing of memories. We're all for this next world-focused evangelism, but what about a this world focused advocacy? Or yes, demonic deliverance for the oppressed, but what about deliverance from systems that perpetuate oppression? And so you see, we've created this false dichotomy, I think, theologically, where we have to choose, are you one or the other? Are you a revivalist or an activist? Revivalists can typically end up being a little bit oblivious to the world around us, and activists can end up being a little bit angry and bitter about the world around us. But I think the key in all of this is the landing of that verse, which says, becoming like Jesus in his death. And so in John 10, Jesus characterizes life in its fullness as the good shepherd laying down his life for others a number of times. So to answer your question, what does awakening look like in society? It looks like, I believe, resurrection power, meeting participatory suffering, and becoming like Jesus in his death, showing the world that a life that wouldn't make sense if God didn't exist.
Pete, we appreciate you and love you and wish you God's great blessing in all your work. Thank you so much for taking some time with us. Will you all help me thank Pete for joining us?
Thanks, David.